The hours after that night were unbearable. My mind refused to quiet down, replaying every detail I had seen and every whisper I had overheard. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, that my son had simply fallen into bad company, but the fragments of conversation had been too clear. He wasn't simply hiding a friend, he was guarding a secret that crossed boundaries no parent ever expects their child to cross. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but I noticed the changes instantly. His eyes avoided mine, his phone never left his hand, and his answers were shorter, more defensive. The easygoing boy I once knew now seemed like a stranger, carefully building walls between us. Days turned into weeks, and the signs became harder to ignore. Late-night walks under the pretense of fresh air, whispered calls from behind closed doors, and a restlessness in his demeanor whenever the house grew too quiet. I found myself listening outside his room, straining to hear clues. One evening, I picked up his discarded jacket and a faint perfume lingered on it, a scent far too familiar. My heart sank as recognition hit me. It wasn't the fragrance of some unknown girl from his school. It belonged to someone I had welcomed into my life, someone who had sat at my table and shared meals with us. The realization churned my stomach. If my suspicion was right, my son wasn't sneaking around with just anyone. He was involved with a person far too close, someone who should have known better, someone who had betrayed not just me but the trust of our entire family. I wanted proof, not just instinct. So I watched more carefully, noting every slip in his excuses, every hurried glance at his phone, every rush to leave the house after a message. His stories grew weaker, study groups that didn't exist, errands at odd hours, friends whose names changed each time. One evening, his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I hesitated, then picked it up, guilt tearing at me but curiosity winning. A single message lit the screen. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was risky, but thrilling. Be careful with your mom, she's starting to notice." My hands trembled as the truth stared back at me. This wasn't a fling born out of youthful recklessness. It was deliberate, ongoing, and dangerously close to home. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about my son's choices, it was about the person he chose. Someone I trusted. Someone I let into my life without hesitation. Anger surged within me, tangled with sorrow and disbelief. How could my son not see the damage he was causing? Or worse, did he see it and simply not care? I carried this burden in silence, torn between confronting him and dreading the confirmation of what I already knew. Each night, as he slipped out with the same careless excuses, my heart grew heavier. The truth was no longer hidden. It was a shadow following us around the house, poisoning every word, every glance. And still, I said nothing, because I knew once it was spoken aloud, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence could no longer protect me. I had carried the weight of suspicion until it crushed my ability to act normal. One evening, when he tried to leave again with yet another excuse, I stopped him at the door. My voice was calm, but it carried the sharpness of truth. I told him I knew, that I had seen, that I had heard enough to piece together the reality he had tried so hard to hide. His face drained of color, and for the first time in weeks, he couldn't meet my eyes. At first, he denied it. He laughed nervously, claimed I was overthinking, insisted I was misunderstanding harmless moments. But when I mentioned the message, the perfume, the words I had overheard, his denial collapsed. His shoulders slumped, his lips trembled, and silence filled the room between us. It was an admission without words. My son, my own flesh and blood, had entangled himself in a betrayal so cruel it made my chest ache. I demanded to know why. Why risk everything for someone he shouldn't have touched? Why lie to me day after day, knowing each excuse was another crack in our bond? His eyes finally lifted, filled with tears, and what spilled out wasn't anger but desperation. He confessed he hadn't meant for it to happen, that it began with attention he never expected to receive. He felt seen, admired, validated in a way that tempted him beyond reason. He admitted he knew it was wrong, that every moment was carried with guilt, but the pull had been stronger than his conscience. My heart wavered between fury and sorrow. I wanted to shout, to shake him until he understood the magnitude of what he had done, but seeing him cry broke me in ways I didn't anticipate. He was not only guilty but also lost, drowning in choices that spiraled beyond his control. Yet knowing his vulnerability didn't erase the betrayal. The person he had chosen was not a stranger. It was someone who had looked me in the eye with friendliness while destroying everything behind my back. I pressed him for details, and reluctantly, he revealed what I feared most. The affair partner was indeed who I suspected, someone who had no place crossing into his world in such a way. Hearing the confirmation was worse than the suspicion. My hands trembled, my voice cracked, and in that moment, I felt as though I had lost more than trust. I had lost the foundation of my family. Our confrontation lasted hours, words spilling out between us like daggers. He begged me not to tell anyone, begged me to keep this secret locked away. But how could I protect him from the consequences of choices that had already scarred us both? By the end, the air between us was thick with regret, anger, and shame. The house felt smaller, suffocating, as if every corner whispered of what had been hidden there. The confrontation had torn open the truth, but instead of relief, it left only wounds too raw to ignore. The days after the truth came out were heavy with silence. Every corner of the house felt tainted, as though the walls themselves carried the echoes of betrayal. My son avoided me, moving quietly from room to room, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights. I carried the weight of what I knew, unsure how to move forward. Each time I looked at him, I saw both the little boy I once protected and the young man who had shattered the trust one placed in him. The contradiction tore me apart. The fallout extended beyond just the two of us. Word eventually slipped out, as secrets always do. The person he had entangled himself with could no longer hide either. Their mask fell, exposing the truth to those around us. The betrayal wasn't only mine to bear anymore. It spread into the family, into friendships, into every bond that had once felt safe. People whispered, eyes lingered. Questions were asked in cautious tones. The scandal was no longer behind closed doors. It was alive in the open, demanding to be faced. My son tried to apologize. His words came in fragments, laced with shame. He said he regretted every step, that he wished he could erase the choices he made. He promised he had been blinded, convinced himself it was something deeper than it was. But as much as I wanted to believe him, I knew some wounds cut too deep for words to heal. Trust, once broken, does not return in full. His remorse was real, but so was the damage. The other person, the one I once trusted, showed no such regret. They tried to justify themselves, to twist the story, to claim affection where there had only been manipulation and selfishness. Their excuses only deepened my anger. They had not only crossed a forbidden line but dragged my son into a spiral that could haunt him for years. To me, they were no longer someone with a place in our lives but a shadow of betrayal that I wanted erased from memory. In the quiet moments, I wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Should I forgive my son for his weakness? Should I cut ties completely with the one who had lured him in? Should I tell the world everything, or keep what remained private to shield us from further pain? There was no guide for navigating a storm like this. What I knew for certain was that nothing would ever return to how it once was. The innocence I saw in my son was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of choices made too young, too recklessly. And yet, beneath my anger, my love for him remained. Love doesn't vanish even when trust does, it lingers, wounded, waiting for the possibility of healing. As days turned into weeks, I realized the only way forward was through honesty. No more silence, no more hidden truths. We had to face the aftermath head-on, no matter how uncomfortable. Because secrets had already destroyed enough, and I refused to let them dictate the rest of our lives. Healing after betrayal is never simple. In the quiet aftermath, I often found myself staring at my son, wondering how we had arrived at this place. The pain didn't vanish with apologies, nor did the anger dissolve with tears. What lingered most was the emptiness, the gap where trust used to live. He tried, in his own way, to rebuild what he had broken. Small gestures of respect, longer conversations, less secrecy. But each act reminded me of how far we had fallen, of how fragile we had become. The person who had played such a destructive role in all of this was gone from our lives, yet their shadow remained. They left behind questions that would never be answered. Why they did it, how they could cross a line so cruelly, what they truly wanted. I stopped seeking explanations because I realized no answer could justify the hurt. Some betrayals cannot be explained. They can only be endured. What surprised me most was how deeply this experience forced me to look at myself. I questioned my parenting, wondered if I had missed signs of my son's loneliness, if I had been too blind to notice his need for validation. Guilt crept in alongside sorrow, reminding me that even though his choices were his own, I still bore the ache of wondering whether I could have prevented it. In those reflections, I found a painful truth. Love cannot shield someone from temptation, and trust cannot guarantee loyalty. Over time, I realized forgiveness was not about excusing what had happened but about freeing myself from being chained to it. Carrying anger every day would have poisoned both of us further. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting, it meant allowing space for growth. My son needed to learn, to confront his mistakes, and to face the consequences. And I needed to let go of the illusion of perfection I once held about him. He was human, flawed, capable of hurting me just as anyone else could. Accepting that was the hardest lesson. The story of what happened in my home will never leave me. It has carved itself into my memory, a reminder of how quickly trust can crumble, how fragile relationships are when honesty is abandoned. Yet it has also taught me resilience. I learned that silence only feeds secrets, that facing the truth, no matter how devastating, creates the only chance for healing. I learned that betrayal is not only about two people, it ripples outward, shaking families, friendships, entire foundations of life. If there is a lesson in this, it is that infidelity never destroys only the people involved, it destroys everyone who loves them. My son's choices didn't just wound me, they scarred him too. And though we continue to rebuild, brick by brick, the cracks will always be visible. I walked in that day and froze, unprepared for what I would see. What followed was heartbreak, confrontation, and a painful journey I never asked for. But through it all, I learned that even in the ruins of betrayal, there is still the possibility of growth, if only we have the strength to face it.